Yeah. Well, I've taken. Yes. Just raise it. Well, that's a stick it to the next expert to work out. That's great. Thank you.
Can you wear the microphone as well?
Yes, certainly.
Not because your voice may not carry, but
No, it seems to stop here, doesn't it?
well, no, there's a loop system in here as well.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
for the people with hearing aids.
Is it switched on at the moment?
No, it's not.
Right,
You
okay.
press that in once,
Okay.
the light will flash and you're then live.
And
Just clip that on your jack lapel, it'll be fine.
round about there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Lovely.
They've got good pickups.
Thank you.
And it's in the morning. So is that the first time you've anyway.
Yes, I'm not. I mean, don't knock them all. I've just got a slideshow on it. And is this Zooming that we
No, it's YouTube.
YouTube. Okay. So where do you want me to start? It's maybe showing the slides.
If you're on the far side of the picture, that would be good.
Yeah.
About here, this side. That's perfect, yeah.
What if I stand this side? Is that better?
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah. Oh.
That's why you will
Yes. I'm not switched on. Yeah. Well, I keep saying, it's not over yet. And of course, strangely, it started off with being an old something, and now it's a young person. So it's mainly small kids.
Yeah, well, there are one or two seats.
I've counted up to 50.
Now we take this.
I don't think I'll have crowd
We haven't done this crowd. This is the biggest thing.
You're famous from before.
I should have charged more.
Well, the treasurer was Monday and
Well, that's what helped a bit. I didn't like to sort of come out and just try and sell books because they fortunately sell well enough. Anyway, but I haven't thought of it.
well, it's interesting.
The Christmas one's just out because it was supposed to go out in August. It was November the 1st. Printing press.
Can you leave that one, please, Alan? David.
I didn't want to say Well, they're probably like me, they're probably think they're gay.
Right. Attention. Right. Welcome everybody, and it's really good to see so many people coming here today. We're getting a little bit worried about the numbers because we have a limit of 60 held by the church at the moment, but we are at the moment at 53. So thanks to everybody for coming. Just a couple of remarks. I don't know how many of you noticed, we've had some website problems over the last 2 or 3 days caused by a hardware failure somewhere. Do you know where?
At the service centre, wherever that
Wherever that it may be. Somewhere in the world, the servers failed. The website is working partially, but not for membership renewals or one or two emails.
Emails aren't working.
So there are quite a few bits, but you can certainly interrogate it still. What I'll do is, as soon as we know it's working, I'll send out a blanket email to all members just to let you know. So if you can let me know, Paul, when you think it's all up and running.
Well, I can put it out.
Or you can put it out, yeah. Fine. Okay, a few other points which I wasn't really going to talk about. Next month we've got John Crouch's cookery demonstration. I saw John here. There you are, John. So it's beginning of December. I can't remember the exact date at the moment. But prior to that, we're going to have a short special general meeting, which hopefully you've read about in the newsletter, making a few small tweaks to the Constitution, ready to assist us going forward and matching what other U3As have done elsewhere. If you can't come on the day, would you please send your apologies and your vote into Penny so that we can register that beforehand, much as we did at the last Zoom AGM. That then counts to our quorum. So if you could do that, that would be great. Vote either way, no pressure. So just have that. We will be Zooming it on the day, I hope, but bear with us because when we've tried to Zoom at science meetings, it hasn't been very successful. So bear with us on that, but we will try and Zoom on the day that don't count on it. Anyway, so message is please vote in advance if you're not coming to the meeting. Moving on, our AGM is going to be held at the end of February next year. Formal notice will come out in the December newsletter, which will be published sometime between Christmas and New Year, hopefully. But what we do need, or the committee is down to about 8 people at the moment. We can have a maximum of 12, and it would be great to have some new input on the committee. We need to keep the flow of people coming through the committee to keep ideas going, and the more people we have, the better we can share the work around. It's not terribly onerous for the majority. We meet approximately once a month for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So give it a thought. If you think we can help in any way, have a word with any of the 3 of us here. Vic, who's on committee, Paul, who's our IT man, and myself, I'm chairman. Assume you all know me, by the way, I'm Ian Paul. I've got to introduce myself. And bear in mind that a few years ago we nearly folded as a youth brigade because the committee disappeared out to nearly zero. So you need to keep people coming on the committee. Help as well. That's right, that's enough of me. That'd be agreed. And over to Alan and Lonnings of Cumbria.
What's the funny noise?
Sorry?
That usually means the batteries are going to give up.
Where's it coming from?
Can you try this battery instead?
We've got 11 people on YouTube as well at the moment.
Oh, 11 people.
Yep.
Oh, this is a story of my life. Prepared and spare.
Well, we don't know for sure.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
No cracks.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
No, this isn't going to work either.
That was good.
Was it good?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
That's all we do.
Can you hear me, Mother? At the back? Yeah.
Okay, what are you doing with Alan?
Lovely. I've got to stand here for YouTube. This is a first for me. Hello, YouTube. That's great. Oh, no, sorry, kill that one. That's it, just leave one or two on at the back. Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you all. My name's Alan Cleaver, and very glad to be here to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you very much for braving the weather. A chap asked me the other day, does it ever stop raining in Cumbria? And I said, well, it's hard to answer. I've only been here since 2005, so I can't really tell you. But I, as you can probably tell from the accent, not a Cumbrian. I'm from Rugby in the Midlands, or Mugby as Dickens called it when he travelled through. I moved here in 2005 with my wife Leslie. Leslie was brought up here. We moved up from Winchester and live in Whitehaven now. And I think when I arrived here, I was pleasantly surprised. I knew the Lake District was lovely, but it was a delight to find that Cumbria, real Cumbria, had so much to offer as well. And although I feel a bit sort of guilty in preaching to you locals about your own county, my only excuse is that as an outsider, I hopefully see things in a slightly different light. And I love all those little nooks and crannies that don't normally get a mention. I mean, I say I came from Rugby and we only have footpaths there. But when I got to Cumbria, I found out that you have Lonnings, Trods, Watts, Drovers Roads, Corpse Roads, Meanderings, everything. And it was a real delight to find all these different types of paths. And Leslie and I have always taken an interest in history and folklore wherever we've lived. Leslie she's got a real job. She works at the archive office at Whitehaven. So she was able to help me with the historical research. And so we started collating and collecting different things of interest that we came across. And the first book that, I wanted to publish a few books. The first one I published was on Corpse Roads of Cumbria. I was rather taken by the sort of slightly macabre interest, but I was interested in Corpse Roads, and that was the first book that we looked at, the first subject. I mean, my background is journalism, and I really fully expected to sort of, go to a library, get a book out on Corpse Roads, copy it, change it slightly, and pass it on as my own work. But I was pleasantly surprised to find that there hadn't been a book just on Corpse Roads. Individual ones had been mentioned, but not Corpse Roads in general. And although we became known as the sort of Corpse Road people, we've always taken an interest in other subjects. other types of footpaths. And I think, the pandemic and lockdown, one thing that sort of emphasised to us is the simple pleasure of being able to get out and do a walk and explore the countryside. And going off grid, I mean, we were all anxious, I think, to do not do Ashness Bridge or Coniston, where we'd meet tens of thousands of other tourists, but to explore those lesser known paths where we hopefully wouldn't meet too many people. And it's the spirit that Tolkien captures with this quote, "Not all who wander are lost." It's this idea of going off grid and just wandering about and perhaps getting lost, but perhaps bumping into something interesting en route. And that's certainly what happened to two ladies in Borrowdale, Miss Nora Best and Miss Agnes Robson. And they were walking near Dock Tarn in Borrowdale when they got lost. And they were trying to find their way around when they stumbled across some fairies. And this was in 1941. Now, Marjorie Johnston recorded this and many other sightings of fairies in Britain in the 1940s. And I'll just quote you her report on the two ladies in Borrowdale. "Suddenly they heard the shrill laughter of children, and about 100 yards below them, they saw what they thought 4 or 5 children scampering about around 2 or 3 rather big boulders. Thinking there must be a track near, the two companions immediately made a beeline for the spot, quite expecting to find a family party on the other side of the boulders. But when they arrived, no one was there. And although they searched around for a considerable time, calling out, there was no one to be seen or heard. They were more than a little mystified. We realised," they said, "that it was an unlikely place for children to be in, and as we had reached the spot in 2 or 3 minutes after seeing them, there was no place to which they could have disappeared. Comparing impressions, we both had seen what we thought were small children with long hair streaming out behind them as they ran, and a general look of quaintness about them. We've been puzzled ever since. Could we have disturbed the little people at their play, we wondered. Probably not, but I'd like to dismiss such accounts because you do come across people who see and experience very incredible things, but their sincerity is there. And there's echoes of this one with a famous ghost case, some of you may know, 2 English teachers in Versailles at the start of the 20th century who believed that they'd slipped back in time while they were walking around Versailles. And I quote this one in particular because when I came to Cumbria in 2005, I was quite surprised at how many fairy legends and fairy stories you have in the county. I suppose I associated fairies with Devon, Cornwall, Isle of Man, Ireland, and I've not really associated Cumbria with fairies. But you have quite a nice selection. Many of you will know of the Beetham fairy steps in the south of the county. This is also a corpse road by chance. That rather wet, bedraggled person is Leslie, by the way. And it's a corpse road and the fairy steps. And the legend or the story is that if you can walk up those steps without touching the sides and get through without touching the rocks, your wish will be granted. It doesn't work. I tried it, but it's a nice way. And just close to where we live in Whitehaven, there is Fairy Rock, which is near Saltham Pit, or probably the new Whitehaven coal mine, if people have their way. But this is just a mile south of Whitehaven. The Fairy Rock used to go out into the sea here. There's an archway of rather soft red sandstone rock. This is all that's left of it, these red bits here. And it was a popular walk in Victorian times. People from Whitehaven or St Bees would walk along to this rocky outcrop often carving their initials on the rock. And in fact, you still find rocks with initials on, even though most of this collapsed into the sea in a storm in about 1875. But you need to erase from your mind the idea that fairies are like Tinkerbell and Walt Disney. English fairies are, like the ladies said, small people, just slightly smaller than humans. A Cumberland writer, Robert Anderson, wrote in the early 19th century about them. He said, they were neither wholly human nor divine nor demonical, but a kind of medley of all three, a strange mixture of body and spirit, and they could assume either or both as the case demanded or necessity arose. They were invariably clothed in the robes of the purest white, but though tall, almost as the ordinary race of women, their tread left no impression upon the grass, nor as they floated gracefully through the dance did they brush even the glistening dew from the frequent harebells. This is not the Whitehaven I recognise, but anyway. In short, they were an amiable and harmless race of beings whose chief delight appeared to consist in singing their sweet songs and dancing their rounds in the clear moonlight, and everybody loved them. And although the rocks crumbled into the sea, it was known that they also danced at nearby Fleswick Bay every Midsummer's Eve. And the coastal path now, of course, goes along this route, but there's no sign recording the fairy rock, the legend, which is about a local lad falling in love with the Queen of the Fairies. None of that's recorded or mentioned, which is, I think, a great shame. I wonder about getting a plaque put up, and to be fair, the council did put a plaque up, but it's not the one I had in mind. It just says Fairy Rocks Danger, and rather nicely there's a little picture. I think that's supposed to be a fairy with a warning triangle or somebody falling off. Saltham Pit has actually been closed to the public now because they're worried about landslide subsidence. So I certainly can't encourage you to just lift up the tape and walk down there. But it's, as I say, it also involved Fleswick Bay, and it would be, I think, a nice sort of tourism piece just to have something to record that. Getting lost is usually a prelude to disaster in this, but in this frantic society, many of us are drawn to that sort of idea of just for an hour or so, not knowing where we are. And you might think it difficult to do in this age of Google Earth, SatNav, Ordnance Survey maps. You'd think everything would have been mapped, but I very quickly realised in 2005 that that's not quite the case. And our hunt for this parallel universe started with Lonnings. And Lonning is a dialect term, as most companies will know, for a lane, a country lane. And I mean, Lonnings are difficult to define. I find most Cumbrians know precisely what a Lonning is and when it becomes a bridle way. There's a certain feel about a Lonning, and I think I'll try and define it as a path that's about half a mile long, low level, flat, often with a farm at the end. And this may link with what one person has suggested is the origin of the term Lonning, which is from an old word lone, which meant the quiet place by the farm. It's a lovely word. I don't suppose most farmers will think that there is any quiet place by the farm, but it was where villagers would go to get milk, eggs, or other produce from the farm. So it's thought that the path to the lone became the Lonning. But there are other theories. And in a sense, any lane is a Lonning. You know, there are plenty of Lonnings in Cumbria. But what I concentrated on and was very interested in was those that had a particular name. And so this one here is Lovely Lonning, which is, well, as you can see near Outerby. Is that how it's pronounced? Outerby? Outerby, which is southwest of Carlisle. It's one of the few that's got Lonning actually on the signpost. But I can't encourage you to go and visit this one because despite the name Lovely Lonning, it's not particularly lovely. What interested me was that you talk to people and they'd say, oh yes, that's Rakes Lonning. And you'd say, well, it's not on the map as Rakes Lonning. It's not on a signpost as Rakes Lonning. How do you know it's called Rakes Lonning? And of course, it's just because it always has been. So I like this idea that Ordnance Survey missed out this whole sort of network of footpaths. They're all public footpaths. Each of these I'm going to mention are public footpaths, but they're very rarely named on Ordnance Survey maps. And the names were just fantastic. Lovers Lonning, of course, there's two or three of those in the county. Blue Bottle Lonning, Dog Lonning, which seems to be because it's got a sort of dog leg in it rather than associated with any particular dog. Tatey Pot Lonning at Rough by Sands. I'm told Tatey Pot is a Cumbrian delicacy, and apparently there used to be a cottage at the end of this Lonning that made Tatey Pot. Thieves Lonning, Gallows Lonning, Aggie's Lonning, Ha-Ha Lonning, Cuckoo Lonning, Gypsy Lonning. And so as we started collecting each of these names, and although, as I say, there are many lovely Lonnings, we've just looked at those that have got a local name to them. One of the first we went to see were Fat and Thin Lonning at Maryport. And if you park at Netherhall School and look across the road, you'll see these two footpaths. And that's Leslie getting in the picture again. But there's Fat Lonning on the right and there's Thin Lonning on the left. And it's Fat Lonning because it's wide and it's Thin Lonning because it's thin. In fact, Thin Lonning's real name is Pigeonwell Lonning. And when we give this talk in Maryport, half the audience say, no, that's not Pigeonwell. It's all, I've only ever known it as Thin. And the other half said, I've never heard it called Thin. It's Pigeonwell. But it's one of those magical qualities about, Lonnings have a number of magical qualities. One of them is that the name changes. And the other is that the Lonnings often move. So as to exactly which Lonning it is often up for debate. But this is Fat and Thin. And there's a nice walk, park at Netherhall School, cross the road, then go along Fat Lonning, which then drops down to the coast. So it's a nice thing there. Turn left past the golf course, follow the coastal path to the Senhouse Museum, call in there for a cup of tea, and then return via Thin Lonning. And as this picture shows, Thin Lonning can be very thin. There's barely room for one person down this. Parts of this Lonning have got these very old walls along. So it's perhaps not one for the height of COVID or lockdown, but it's a nice circular walk anyway. And we thought, well, maybe we could divide all Lonnings in Cumbria into fat and thin and have, just the two categories. But then we were giving a talk at Egremont and a chap said, have you come across squeezy gut Lonning? And I realised this was a whole new level. Squeezy gut is a term you Cumbrians often use for anything that's thin and narrow. So a number of stiles and gates and passes through rocks are called squeezy gut. And a lot of people refer to a thing being a squeezy gut. And this is at House Senna, if you're on the A595 by Gosford. House Senna's on a single track to the coast. And you pull in, you go in on that track and you pull into the lane, the first sort of pull in on the left. And that, believe it or not, is squeezy gut Lonning. You'll never get through it because it's now completely overgrown. But if you walk a few yards along, you'll see this is the Lonning going down here. And in living memory, a farmer has told me that she used to take her cows down squeezy gut because they no longer use it, nobody walks it. It's basically caved in on itself, which I don't mind. I mean, it's still listed as a footpath, so if you want to take a flamethrower or machete down there, you can. But I think if we're not going to use it, then give it back to Mother Nature. And if you carry on down that track in House Senna, that track on the old maps was called Great Lonning. It's no longer called that, as far as I know, by any of the locals. But then you get into House Senna itself, and there's this one, which was also recorded on what was the map, about 200 years old, and this is Little Lonning. So this is their version, I suppose, of Fat and Thin. Little Lonning is delightful, but it's only about the length of this route, and it's signposted a public footpath, but it doesn't go anywhere. It just stops. I suppose it goes on to another squeezy gut. You won't get any further, but it's there. And I've always liked this idea. There's been a number of inquiries by footpath inspectors on disputed paths, and often the people have said, you know, the owners wanting to close it, saying, well, it can't be a public footpath because it doesn't go anywhere. And the inspectors have always come back and said, oh no, this is England, that doesn't matter. Footpaths don't have to go in. And I mean, it's another book, isn't it? But you will find a lot of footpaths that just stop in the middle of a field, and it's lovely for that. So we recorded all of these, and you'll be glad to know if you've got internet that they're on Google. And if you Google Lonnings map, Cumbria, you'll be led to this. And if you haven't got Google, give me a shout and I'll try and print it off or post it to you. But each of these blue dots is a named Lonning. The red ones are one or two that have been lost to history. So you can click on any of those blue dots and find out the name of the Lonning and what I know about it, and hopefully a grid reference, because you rarely find them on the real maps. I'm still adding to it. I still come across new Lonnings, which is great. Most of them, as you'll see, are sort of north and west, almost the old Cumberland. And I don't know whether that's a reflection of the fact that Lonning was more of a Cumberland term than a Westmoreland term, or just the fact that I live in the west at Whitehaven, and my natural bias has been to find Lonnings in that area. So there's about, I think there's about 300 on there altogether. When I started recording these on the internet, the first thing you do is go on the internet, you know, to look for things. Google didn't know what a Lonning was. He thought it was some bloke in Sweden. But there was one Lonning on there in 2005, and that was the rather lovely Billy Watson's Lonning at Harrington. And I have to thank the Harrington Local History Society for recording this. We will never know, I don't think, who Billy Watson was. He probably lived at the end of the Lonning about 300 years ago. But the Lonning was made famous 200 years ago by a ballad by Harrington-born dialect poet Alexander Craig Gibson. And it's a lovely ballad. In the ballad, he tells of the different Lonnings around Harrington. And he says, but basically, none of them are so private and so sweet as Billy Watson's Lonning on a lounge summer neat. And so he's saying that, you know, you can take your young love anywhere, but Billy Watson's is the best. And lound, I mean, I didn't know any of the dialect. I had to get it all translated by Alan Butler, bless him. But lound is an old term for still or quiet. And I think many Cumbrians still refer to the dandelion head, which you blow on to tell the time, as a clock lound. But here's just one verse, and for lovers of Cumbrian dialect, I can only apologise. Oh, for Billy Watson's Lonning of a lounge summer neat, when stars come few and flately after wearing out daylight, when black-eyed blossom shows itself in half-seen cliffs of grey, and honeysuckle scented more nor ever it is in day, and not a shadow, shape or sound, or sight or sign that tells, and out at what's come sauntering there, but you, your own two selves. There cannot be another spot so private and so sweet as Billy Watson's Lonning of a lounge summer neat. And it's lovely. And what's been nice is that I don't know if somebody's going to join in now, but when we've given a talk a few times, a couple of people have said, "Oh, I can tell you all of that." And although it's been 200 years since it was probably published, they still know every word and can recite the whole thing. So Billy Watson's Lonning is Ian, you haven't got a glass of water, have you? It's the first 3 hours that are the most difficult. So park at Harrington Harbour, walk up Lime Road, and Billy Watson's Lonning is basically the first footpath on the left. It is a public footpath. It's marked such on Ordnance Survey, but you won't find it named on the map, and you won't find a signpost saying Billy Watson's Lonning. The locals have helped me and will, I'm sure, help you, and they'll say, oh yes, it's that one there. It's a fairly nondescript footpath now, I have to say. There are lovely views out over the Solway. But rather nicely, when you get to it, it ends up at Grayson Green, little hamlet of modern houses. There's still a farm, and it's quite nice because, I mean, where I'm standing to take the photo, there are BMWs and modern houses, but there's still cockerels and dogs and other farmyard animals wandering around. There's a lovely crash of the two worlds. But I think a bit like the ferry path. Oh, thank you very much. A bit like the ferry path at Whitehaven. It would be lovely to have a plaque or something, you know, just recording. This is Billy Watson's Lonning, made famous in this ballad, and perhaps quote a verse of it. It's slowly being nibbled away at Grayson Green End, and it would be a shame to lose this. So. So I say you've got about 300 Lonnings that I've found. I'm sure and hope at the end of this, a lot of you are going to put your hand up and say, oh, you missed this one off. You'll be glad to know that I won't be going through every one of them. But what I have done is pulled out my top 5. So if you can imagine Alan Freeman music going in the background as we go through Alan Cleaver's top 5. And then at number 5 is Low Lonning at Gosforth. And Low Lonning is marked on the map as Low Lonning, and it goes from the Wasdale Road to the Esdale Road. And it's a beautiful path. And it goes over the River Blaine. That bridge was over the River Blaine. You might see the occasional farm vehicle going down there, but otherwise it's left to horse riders and walkers. So while everyone else rushes off to Wasdale, stop off at Low Lonning. There's a parking space actually on the Esdale Road end, but I'd recommend parking on the Wasdale Road because it's wider and you can just pull in at the side and then walk along there to enjoy Low Lonning. And it's obviously a very ancient path, not least with the size of that bridge. And it goes on, if you carried on walking, you'd actually come up to Howsenna, so Great Lonning and Little Lonning. And there's tales of smugglers and all other things like that. So it might even be a smuggler's path along there as well. Yes, this one's in Grasmere. So this is one for the Westmoreland. And this is hunting style Lonning. And if you, it's another Lonning actually, which is also a corpse road. The Grasmere Corpse Road, everyone sort of knows the Rydal to Grasmere Corpse Road. With that gets so busy and it's not a particularly nice path, but the nicer Corpse Road at Grasmere is Chapel style to Grasmere, and it comes down hunting style Lonning. So you can tick off in your I Spy book of Lonnings and Corpse Road along there. So if anybody asks me about the Corpse Road at Grasmere, I always say, don't do the touristy one, do the lesser known one. And hunting style I like because, well, it's gorgeous any time of the year, and autumn. We probably just missed the best of it, but the colours are fantastic. But I like it as well because it's the setting of a Christmas ballad. And we're not sure who wrote the ballad, probably Joyce Withers, who died, I think, about 20 years ago. And each December in Grasmere, the Grasmere players do a Christmas reading. And they basically just sit round and they read Dickens and other things. And she always stood up and read this ballad. And I'm just going to go and get the book for it. And it's lovely because it's a Christmas story, but set in hunting style and silver owl. I'm not going to do any adverts for my books, but it's more sort of product placement, you know. But we've just published a Lake District Christmas, £10 from the gift shop, but it's available at the new bookshop and all of that, and I include it in here. And the ballad tells of Joe and Mary from Braithwaite, rather than Joseph and Mary, going with their bairn up Huntingstyle Lonning. And there's this sort of suggestion, is it Joe and Mary from Braithwaite, or could it be somebody else? So I'll just read you the last couple of verses. Up Lonning they came, late in the evening. We never heard them come, though night was still, as a shelter tarn is. Only a whisper from the Lyle Beck near at hand, splashing down in spate. Quiet they came and late, and none set out as they passed us, just so. A young lass walking wearily, and a man, like Joe, or not so like, maybe. And the two of them bent over a bairn asleep, and as they went through the dark trees and lake mists, there was light. Up Lonning they came, just Braithwaite's lass with a man, on a winter's night. Just Braithwaite's Mary, who else in the Christmas night? The Grasmere players don't read it every year, shame on them, because I think it's lovely. But it's this is the Huntingstyle Lonning. This is the Lonning that she placed the story on. This is in at number 3. This is Lucy Gray Lonning. This is one that I only discovered very recently, and this is out at Threlkeld, Blencathra, you know, the old TB hospital. If you drop down from there, from the farm to the river, there's a footpath which is known locally as Lucy Gray Lonning. And the story around it is a winter's night, and Lucy, who's aged, I think, about 9, is sent out by her dad to meet mother, who's coming home from market. Doesn't get up off the settee himself. He sends the daughter out with a lantern to sort of greet her and show her home. But a snowstorm gets up and she's lost. And they eventually find her tiny footprint going through the snow. And they discover that she's fallen into the river and drowned. And this story is well known in a sense because Wordsworth wrote a poem about it. One of his early poems was Lucy Gray. And but Wordsworth makes it very clear that he'd been told this by Dorothy and that it had happened, it was based on an actual event that had happened in Halifax in Yorkshire. So quite why Threkeld has sort of nabbed this story for itself, nobody knows. It might be, I mean, I think minstrels and balladeers and all of that in the 19th century used to take popular songs and localize them. So it might have been just that sort of effect. But we were walking there yesterday. It's a lovely footpath down to the river, and it's easy to come up with a sort of circular walk back to the car park. There's a public car park at Blencathra. What's the TB hospital called? Blencathra Centre. It's a field studies place now, isn't it? There's a public car park there. But even better, there's a cafe at Threkeld, which is worth tying in. And number 2, I put Ladies Lonning, which is at Rockcliffe, up near Carlisle. And Tony Perini told me about this. Some of you may know Tony from his work with the British Legion. He's always on TV about this time of year anyway. So when you see Tony Perini come up on Border News, you go, oh, that's Ladies Lonning. I suspect ladies because it's like a lover's lonning. And the only reason I like this one is because the village have sort of adopted it. It's a public footpath, but the villagers have planted daffodils, snowdrops, bluebells. They go out with the lawnmower. They walk it all regularly, and they really look after it and have cared for it, which I think we probably need more of. So I quite like Ladies Lonning. And in at number 1, some of you will recognise this because it's not far from here, is Seacross Lonning at Withop Mill. And this is a gorgeous path, and I've always liked it because of this overhanging, is this hazel? I don't know my flora and fauna well enough, but I think it's hazel, which grows up and makes this wonderful shelter from the hot summer sun. This time of the year, it's very wet, so you'll need your wellies. But park at St Cuthbert's Church and walk along a bit. Seacross Lonning is marked on the Ordnance Survey map and it also has a signpost. So it's quite easy to find. And it runs parallel, I suppose, to the main road. So nobody uses it, everyone sticks to the main road. So it's always a nice quiet path. And you end up going back into Withup Mill. And yes, that's a winter picture. I wanted a picture of it in each of the seasons. I wanted spring. I went down there, it was like one marigold. And this is hopeless. And then just as I was about to give up and go, this little chap came round the corner. It's an interesting thing with Lonnings. They don't seem to always have particular boundaries or borders. So if you go in the spring, just be aware that, the lambs may have sort of wandered into there as well. And you can come back once you reach Withup Mill. You can come back again through Seacross Lonning, but you can also go along Green Lonning, come back via Green Lonning, which is up on the side of the fell. So it's a nice circular walk. Green Lonning is a totally different character with nice views over towards Cockermouth and come back to the church. Seacross Lonning is also known to the locals by a different name. They call it Boggle Lonning. Because there was somebody apparently hanged in the Lonning, so it's got a bit of a ghost story associated with it. But Seacross or Boggle Lonning and Green Lonning is a lovely circular walk, and when life gets a bit too stressful, that's where you'll find me wandering along there. Well, I've rambled on enough about Lonnings. I want to just quickly talk about some of the other strangely named footpaths that you have here in Cumbria. And I thought I'd mention just a few of these because the names are just great. This is at Kirby Stephen, and this is Bloody Bones Lane. And the name, actually, we know where the name come from because it's recorded in Sullivan's history book. This is the place where cattle were buried during the cattle plague, which ravaged the country in the year 1747. So it's lasted 200 odd years. There's no signpost saying it's Bloody Bones Lane. I think there is a map in the town centre which sort of shows where it is. It is a fairly nondescript path, it has to be said, but I like the name, and I think it'd be nice to have a sign up saying Bloody Bones Lane. I mean, just think how much that would be shared on the internet. The tourism body wouldn't need a budget, you just put that up there. It's a curious thing with names of paths because there's one in Hertfordshire which was known as Wibbly Wobbly Lane, and it had a signpost saying Wibbly Wobbly Lane, and it was, people loved it. And then the council decided to change the name to Carter Lane, and I think what a missed opportunity, but nice bit of free publicity. Boot in Eskdale very much looks after its footpaths and names them and records the order. So they've put up signs recently for Parsons Passage, and that's the one that goes from the old rectory to St Catherine's Church. There's Anne's Walk, there's 3-yard track or things like that. So they're quite good at naming these. This one doesn't get named. This is Ticklebelly Alley, and this runs from Boot Village. It's just as you're coming out of Boot Village, you can take a shortcut round to the campsite, and that's Ticklebelly Alley. It's one of 2 or 3 Ticklebelly alleys in the country, and the origin of the name is unknown. Various suggestions, which I won't repeat, but the one I like is that it's the field where pigs were kept, and in the summer the grass would grow long enough to tickle their belly. So that's that one. I've been rattling on about Lonnings for a while. A lady got in touch and said, yes, she enjoyed all of these. And did I know about Nanny Knockabouts? And I didn't, but I really wanted to. And this is Nanny Knockabouts at Wetherall. And it's, again, in a sense, a nondescript path, but just because it's called Nanny Knockabouts, we now all want to go up there, don't we, and visit it, And she explained that Nanny Knockabouts is where she and other children would wait after school for their parents to come and pick them up. And I think like you have Nanny Smith and Nanny Jones and different names for your grandmothers. This was a grandmother who would look after you and keep you safe until until Mum and Dad came up. St Bees is another place where they're proud of their Lonnings. You'll find a map on the internet on the St Bees website of their Lonnings and name Lonnings. So we've got Lovers Lonning at St Bees, which is really nice, just been restored a bit, and Gashouse Lonning, not quite so pretty. And this is the Dandy Walk, and so named because apparently the St Bees school kids used to walk this in all their finery, and so it gained the name Dandy Walk. There's a Starvation Lane as well, which is a part of a single track road now going down to the beach just south of the village. Starvation is a Cumbrian word which doesn't always mean starved as in lack of hunger. It's starved as in cold or frozen. And Starvation Lane, I think, got its name because it's very cold and frozen one. A lot of Leslie would tell you, she was here, a lot of the death reports and inquests from old Cumberland records talk about somebody being starved to death on the fell. And it's what it means frozen to death. And I was talking to the local historian about these paths and exactly where Lovers Lonning was and all of this. And I said, and what about the path next to you? And he said, oh, that. He said, that's Tommy Style. And I said, well, who's Tommy Style? And he said, well, nobody knows who Tommy was. Style is an old dialect word for steep or a steep climb. And this is a steep climb up. So Tommy Style is this unnamed footpath just in the middle of the village. So I've got my Lonnings map, and I've got my curiously named footpaths map on Google, so you can read them all there. That means you don't have to buy my books, which are 10 quid each in the gift shop over there. But I've put my curiously named footpaths on there. And I will just quickly go through some of the others. I want to mention, I'm not going to talk about corpse roads. Corpse roads were the paths used in medieval times to take people from the remote parts of the parish to the mother church. And as I say, we've done a book on corpse roads and we're still collecting them. And somebody got in touch with me in lockdown and said, do you know about the corpse road at Oldale? Goes from the hamlet of Affertree down to the church. And I didn't. But I'm a bit cynical. Yeah, but what's your source? You know, every village claims its local corpse road. Have you got any evidence for this? And he said, well, it's on Wikipedia. And it hadn't occurred to me to sort of actually look on Wikipedia for corpse roads, but there it is. And I'm sure that it was. It runs from the hamlet of Affertree down to the rather remote now St James Church. And it's a beautiful path. I've actually, for those who wanted it, I've done a leaflet on the Affertree Corpse Road because the wonderful May's Tea Room is at Oldale, and you can do it as a circular walk, stopping off for coffee and cake. So if anybody wants one, there's one on the windowsill over there describing the route. And we've just passed through Halloween, so I thought I ought to mention one or two ghosts. That's St James Church at Oldale, being restored at the moment, but a charming spot to have your bait. You see, I'm talking like a Cumbrian now. I've made a note of footpaths associated with ghosts as well. You expect corpse roads to be associated with ghosts, and surprisingly, they're not really. This ghost occurs on the Wasdale to Estdale Corpse Road and is said to be of a coffin strapped to a horse that was lost on the Corpse Road, never to be seen again, but which can still be seen. And it's associated with Burnmore Tarn, which is a very bleak and remote spot. Wouldn't recommend doing that walk in this weather, but I know Eric Robson and others usually do it on Boxing Day or New Year's Day as a family tradition. But the corpse road we found with the most ghosts was perhaps rather surprisingly the Workington to Camerton Corpse Road. And it seems the Corpse Road did go that way, working rather than Camerton to Workington. And this is a much nicer walk along by the river to the church at Camerton. And it's got ghosts of grey ladies, Roman soldiers, nuns, headless horsemen, Workington Hall's famous White Lady, and the Camerton Hall Boggle. So all the way along to the church, you've got this wonderful cavalcade of ghosts that you can meet. If you ever want to organise a Halloween ghost walk, then that Corpse Road is the one to do. The one that we did for our book Get Lost. Did I mention my book? If you want to buy something for somebody you love at Christmas and a Lake District Christmas, and if it's somebody you're not quite so keen on, then Get Lost. But we included this one here because it's quite a remarkable ghost story, and it concerns Christopher Cloudsdale, known as Kit Cloudsdale, or Poor Kit, because as far as we know, he's the only person we know to have been killed by a ghost. And he was killed by the Ealing Hearth Dobby. And the Dobby was quite famous, infamous in the area, and used to haunt the area. And one dark and stormy night, well, November the 29th, 1849, if you want it precise, 16-year-old Kit had finished his work at the bobbin mill. He was an apprentice. The bobbin mill, amazingly, still exists, and you can visit it. It's our tourist attraction. He'd finished his work, but he got an errand to do at nearby Force Forge. And the easiest path was to go through Ealing Hearth Woods, but that's the home of the Ealing Hearth Dobby. The woods are lovely, and known locally also as 99 Beeches. And can you believe it? In the 1960s, they were going to chop all these down, and thankfully, some people persuaded them not to. But he was too scared to go that way, so he went over the fell, which is quite a sort of bleak and open walk. Very nice in the summer, but not on November the 29th. And he succumbed to the freezing conditions on the fell. This is how the Westmoreland Gazette reported it. The wandering of the boy could be traced in the woods adjacent to the road he ought to have taken, and on the moor by the balls of snow he dashed from his clogs. To and fro the unfortunate lad had roamed amidst the pelting of that pitiless storm. He must have been driven by the wind and battered by the rain, and it's heartrending to imagine the sufferings of that dreadful night to him. Anyway, as I say, he was. When the inquest came up, it came out that he'd only taken his path because he was too scared to go by the ghosts. So I'm putting it down as ghosts 1, humans 0. But it's a lovely walk, and I say park at Stock Park, Bobbin Mills, have a tour around there, and then walk through the woods and back over the fell. And it's a very nice walk. And I'm going to conclude, and I always use that word conclude because it offers that false hope that I might finish any time before 5 o'clock this evening. No, I am going to conclude with a new type of path. This is a new ancient path, if you can have that tautological device. I often wondered, what in the future would they look back at our time now and say, all those ancient paths, please ignore sat-nav. We don't quite know what it meant. But, what will people look back in the future? And I was helped on this by Tony Vox, author from Coldbeck, did the history of Coldbeck Village. And I was chatting to him on his farm, and he said, I don't know why he mentioned it, but he mentioned that the postman's path went past his farm and on to the next path. And I had not heard this term before, and I didn't know it was a thing. But I rather liked it. And the postman paths were the route of the rural postman in the 19th and early 20th century. And they would often shortcut to farms because they didn't want to go all the way back out to the main road and along and back down. So they either created or they used little-known paths, and they became known as the postman's path. And you can see very clearly on the ones I've managed to research so far where they just go farm to farm to farm. And, clearly that was the purpose of it. And I said, well, that's quite an interesting concept. And I looked up these a bit more on Google, of course, and there's not much on Google, but there's about a dozen postman paths in Britain that are named as such and promoted as such. But as with corpse roads and Lonnings, when you start digging, you find out even more. And I also wanted to sort of look at these because of the nostalgia of writing letters and posting letters. Everybody's texting and emailing these days. And I still write letters. I'm sure some other people do, but that whole concept is dying out. And also the rural postman, because postmen only use vans now. They stopped using bikes in 2014, and they go everywhere by van now, which rather takes the romanticism of it. So we thought we'd look at some of the postman paths in Cumbria, and of course Colbeck was a nice one to start with. But I'm going to point you in the direction of your local one, which is at Lawton. And I did a little leaflet on the Lawton postman's path, and I thought I'd try and do it as a letter, try and sort of keep into the spirit of the thing. And there's copies on the windowsill over there, free of charge. And I'm grateful to Judith Ben, who lives at Lawton, for this route. And in fact, the route that he did was much longer than this. I mean, the routes are often were long. The Shat Postman's Path, which I've also researched, was 15 miles over some very tough terrain, which they would do 6 days a week, every week of the year. So you'll be glad to know I've shortened this one, made it a bit easier. So you start in the village of Lawton by the famous yew tree, and you just walk up a bit. And it basically runs farm to farm to farm. So it goes from Scales to High Swinside to the Hope. I brought it back to Low Swinside, although he carried on walking further into the valley, heading towards Crummock Water. And of course, it's being Lawton, it's got fantastic views over the valley. And I mean, I've now only got about 6 postman's paths, and I'm desperate to find out any more. So please do let me know. But lockdown has meant that I've not been able to do the research that I'd like to have done. And if anywhere's going to promote postman's paths, it's got to be Cumbria, hasn't it? Because we've got Postman Pat and Postman Pat Long Sleddle at Kendal, where John Cunliffe wrote about it. And as I've looked around, I've been looking at more and more things connected with the postal history, and it's surprising what crops up. This is a bridge down near Broughton in Furness, Reeks Causeway Bridge. And this was where the postman Thomas Dawson used to wait for the mail bags to arrive. And while he's sitting on the bridge, he gets out his chisel and he graffitis the bridge. But not like kids of today. This is some of the most lovely ornate calligraphy. You've driven past this hundreds of times, but like everyone else, you drive past it at 60 miles an hour just below Broughton in Furness and don't notice it. But it's worth parking up and going back to have a look. What did he inscribe? Well, some very strange, odd sayings. Things like, a sensible man won't offend me, and no other can. Be kind to the poor. Shelling green peas. England forever. I can paddle my own canoe. Do not stop long at the fair, which I gather is an old folk tune. So they laugh best who laugh last. And one feature I'm desperate to find in Cumbria, there are, I think, about 4 or 5 left in Britain. It's the postman's hut. And the postman's hut was a corrugated iron thing with a pot-bellied stove in. And essentially the postman would do his round, and often if it was a linear route, he'd get to the end of his route, he'd then rest up in the postman's hut. He often had the job as cobbler, so people would often leave their shoes for him to repair, and he'd do that as having a bit of a rest and his lunch. And then he'd come back on the same route and he'd collect your post, because they did. So you'd get your post in the morning, you'd write your reply, he'd come back. He'd often ring a bell, blow a whistle or a horn to let you know he's coming, and you'd come out and you give him your post. So postmen's huts were flimsy corrugated iron, but it would be lovely to find one. Now this one is a very grainy photograph of the Loweswater postman's hut. But this was actually in Judith Ben's backyard in Lawton until it was demolished about 20 years ago, sadly, because when the postman stopped using it at Lawton, they bought it off him to use as a garden shed. So I suspect somebody's got a garden shed somewhere, which was a postman's hut. I'd just like to find one so that we could put it as a postal museum, or just to record the fact that this is what they used. So much work needs to be done on finding these postman's paths. I think that if Cumbria could do this, it would be a great sort of selling point. We probably don't need more tourists, but they do attract them. The most famous postman's path, if you Google postman's path, it shows you the one in Renigidale on the Isle of Harris, off Scotland. And I got in touch with them and I said, how many tourists do you get coming just to walk the postman's path? And they said, well, we surveyed it about 2 years ago and we get about 10,000 people. And I don't want to be parochial, but you've got to go all the way up to the northwest of Scotland, get 2 ferries, then get to Renigidale and then walk to walk a path. But it's just got that romance about it and lovely. So imagine what we could achieve with Shap, where all you've got to do is pull off the M6 and do it, or even to Lawton. Well, I've rambled on for too long. I'm going to end there. Thank you for your interest. Do let me know of other paths you do or don't know, or any postman's huts that you've got squirreled away at the bottom of your garden. And I'll just end with the words of Thomas Dawson, the postman: be kind to the poor, do not stop long at the fair, and paddle your own canoe. Thank you very much. And that's the web address, or if you've got a QR code thing that you could do on that.
Right, thank you very much. I'm fascinated. Obviously, I don't know, like a lot of people, I recognise several of your photos and baths and walks and them as well.
Yeah.
Particularly the Marypole one, which we did a lot during lockdown.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we found it by chance. As you say, it's a lovely walk.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I'm sure you're happy to take a few questions, I hope.
Well, yes, I mean, if any questions
Any
or
comments that anyone would like to make, or questions?
yes.
There is a word called Lonning, L-O-N-N-E-N. Is that the same as Lonning?
That's in Northumbria.
Yeah, it's a northeast sort of thing, and I don't know. Is it the same sort of thing? Is it a footpath? I mean, I know it's a
Originally,
path.
yes.
Is it more of a town centre one than a rural one? Do you know?
No, it's at the outskirts of town, going somewhere different.
Right. Yeah, there does seem to be
Two
a
Ball Lonning, for example, went to Two Ball Farm.
2-4 Lonning.
Two Ball.
Oh, really? Right, okay. I mean, it's there seems to be a sort of definite divide as soon as you get out of Cumbria. It's double N-E-N. Yeah, I mean, the Cumbrian, there's no definite Cumbria spelling. I do it double N-I-N-G, but a lot miss the last G off. Some do spell it with an E. You know, it's dialect. Spell it how you like. It doesn't matter.
Anyone else?
If anybody wants to question
Can't
from
see
the
that.
internet, just chat on the YouTube and I'll relay the question.
We've got about 11 watching on the internet apparently at the moment, so
Yes, come on, YouTube.
and it will remain on YouTube if anybody wants to watch again. Margaret, yeah.
I was just going to say, I presume you know about occupation money, which goes between Arlington and Physically.
Yeah, there's I mean, that's a curious mixture. Occupation Lonning, the Frizzington cuts through Whitehaven, really, down by the sports centre, doesn't it?
No, the bit I know is between Arlington and Physically.
Oh, Arlington and Frizzington. Have I got it right? Yeah, you might. I mean, occupation lanes exist all over the county, but occupation Lonning is this curious mishmash of the two, really. I've yet to find a proper definition of what an occupation lane or Lonning was. it's a recognised term and it's often marked on maps. And it seems to have been where people needed access onto the fell to do their work or to get peat or whatever else. So the occupation names, but I've not found even in the dictionary a proper definition of what occupation Lonning is. But you do often get this mishmash of terms. There's a Jenny Lane Lonning, so it's got Lane and Lonning in the same one. Yeah, you do get a curious mixture sometimes.
Anything else? Any other more comments?
Well, I'm here afterwards, and
I've just got one to
yeah.
ask. Went.
Went,
We've got
another one,
Went,
yes.
The
Yeah.
Went in Deerham. Do you know anything about?
I don't know. Does anybody else know about Went and how that term arose? I mean, I don't come across many of them. Obviously, Cockermouth. It's what? So
There's about 3 in Cumbria,
is there? Is there?
but I think it's just a local term for a little.
An alley or a
Little
ginnel?
cut through. Yeah, as a ginnel or
I think they call different things in like York.
yeah.
Mm.
I mean,
Weights as well.
Cockermouth is lovely because you do sort of make a feature of some of these alleyways and keep the names. What's the one down by the brewery? I want to call it.
Drury Lane.
No, there's a little alleyway with a very nice name, Temperance Alley or something like that. Is it called? Anyway, you do look after your alleys in Cockermouth. Kendal, very good as well. Keswick, less so. Keswick, you walk around Keswick, some nice little alleyways, and sometimes the remnant of a sign in the very top that's faded away. Paraffin Alley is one of the Keswick ones, which is, I mean, paraffin because it's smelt of paraffin. They used to sell paraffin there. And it's very much just a cut through these days. But yeah, it's nice to make features of everything.
It's nice to keep them, isn't it, and remember them, and
Yeah,
we don't want to lose things like that. It's part of our social history.
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again, Alan. As he said, he's got some books and leaflets over on the side, and I think he's got a means of taking payment electronically.
Oh, yes, I've got a new gadget.
He's got
I can only
gadgets,
do it by
so
credit
those
card.
who are interested.
But seriously, they're on sale at the new bookshop, of course, as well.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy for you to support Catherine and the new bookshop. I'm not doing the hard sell here. But I'd much rather have your favourite footpaths and your local place names.
And just a reminder before, well, I lose you all, next meeting is second Monday in December. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, when John's going to talk to us after our special general meeting. So just a reminder, if you can, vote beforehand so that we can be quorate for that. That would be great. And I know a few of you have been asking about membership as well. If we can have a look now, if you'd like to just approach Paul and see what we can do. But I don't think we can take membership on the web at the moment. But we'll let those who are renewing know by email as soon as the website's back up and